Hello, welcome to the first of three interviews with businessman, lawyer, ex-politician, one-time lobbyist and passionate Western Australian, Julian Grill. Julian, preparing for this interview, it occurred to me that whilst you have a very high profile in Western Australia and have had for a long time, not many people in this state know a great deal about you. Perhaps we could start by rectifying that. Can you tell us the Julian Grill story?
Well, that's a bit hard, but I can tell you some pieces of it. I was born in New South Wales, in Sydney, but I really come from Broken Hill, which is a mining town. Then we came to Western Australia when I was about 10, about 1950. We lived in Collie and we lived in Perth. I went to school in Broken Hill, Collie and Perth. I went to Perth Modern School and then the University of Western Australia. In due course, I got a law degree from that university and I was admitted to the bar in 1966.
Having graduated in 1964.
That's right, yes.
And then went into Parliament, I'm told, shortly after that.
Well, not shortly. It wasn't until 1977 that I went into Parliament. So it was a few years. I practiced law for quite some time, both in Perth and in Kalgoorlie.
Principally criminal law?
Well, when you're in the country, you practice all types of law, general practice, but a lot of criminal law, yes.
And you left Parliament in 2001?
I did. I retired in 2001 to do some other things. I'd been there 24 years, and most of that was fairly high profile. I'd been either a minister or a shadow minister for most of that.
And then you became a lobbyist.
I became a lobbyist, and we had a very active time as a lobbyist with my partner, Brian Burke, well known to most people.
Yeah.
It was, in terms of the lobbying business, a very, very active and, I might say, a very, very successful period. It had its repercussions, and I suppose we'll talk about those shortly.
What are you most proud of during your time in the ministry? Say, for example, as the Minister for Agriculture.
Interestingly, with agriculture, it's what we didn't do rather than what we did do. We put an end to new land release, that is, the clearing of broad acres of new land. And until we catch up with the salinity problem in the state, I don't think there should be any broad acre land released again. So we stopped that. So I'm quite proud of that. We've got to look after the environment, and that was one way. And the biggest environmental problem in Western Australia, at least, is all of that agricultural land in Western Australia, which has become salinised. One of the things that we were able to achieve in tourism was the Hillary's Marina.
Yep.
That was achieved against very, very considerable odds.
Yep.
Both of the major papers in Western Australia were against us on that particular one. But now that's the second or third biggest tourist attraction in this state.
Minister for Fisheries.
For the first time in Western Australia, when I was the minister, on the advice of the Fisheries Department and the environmental people, we created some of the biggest and first marine reserves in the world.
And you are, as I understand it, as Minister for Regional Development, involved in the Bunbury 2000 project?
Yes, and we're very, very proud of that. With the people of Bunbury, we were really able to revamp that city, and it's there's a big change from when we started and when we finished. And
in transport, of course, there was the electrification project and the line from Perth to Fremantle.
Well, it was a big step, and although I was the minister, it wasn't something that I did on my own. The Burke government coming in had made the decision that they were going to reintroduce the Perth to Fremantle railway line, and from there we were able to plan for the electrification of the system and the expansion of the system. Now that's there for everyone to see today, and it's going to be expanded on that. But up until that time, previous governments had called a halt, an end to railways within metropolitan Perth, and they were to be replaced with freeways in their stead.
See, but I recall you were also Minister for Trade for a period of time in Western Australia.
Yes, and I loved that period.
Yeah.
We are one of the great trading states in the world, and it was wonderful to go to places like India and China and Hong Kong and Singapore to promote Western Australia. Great privilege.
Can you tell us a little bit about your period as a director of public companies?
They were essentially mining companies.
Yeah.
I've always been interested in mining. My father was involved in the mining industry. My grandfather was involved in the mining industry. My brother was involved in the mining industry, and the companies that I became chairman and director of were all mining companies, mostly based in the goldfields.
And we'll go into the lobbying a bit later on, but can you tell us just briefly about some of the things you felt you achieved during your period as a lobbyist?
Well, I think one of the things that we did achieve on behalf of one of our major clients was to break the BHP Rio monopoly in the Pilbara. I think that was important. If you look at the Pilbara now, there's a whole range of smaller, and one of them larger, that's the one we acted for, FMG, companies that are exporters of iron ore, and one of them at least is a major exporter. But up until that time, there wasn't another company in the Pilbara that could export iron ore. We helped a lot of people in the Mortgage Brokers Affair. We were lobbyists for that large group of people in the end. We were instrumental in government making a big payout to those people who really were victims. We were involved in quite a number of big development projects. We were able to usher those through. We were able to get the environmental approvals for them. Big power station in the south of the state. A number of big developments around Perth and Mandurah. So that was an exciting time.
Looking at this lobbying issue, that a lot of people have misconceptions about what lobbying is all about. But you're talking about things like helping people in the mortgage crisis and helping new mining companies get into the northwest. So it's actually a lot more than people might think.
I think it is, and we did, during that period, we did a lot of pro bono work for single people coming in that didn't have jobs, couldn't get their company off the ground. We were being locked out of tendering processes, couldn't get on the government lists for tenders. A lot of small people that were pretty grateful to get jobs at the end of the day.
Yeah. Just needed somebody to speak for them.
To know their way around. Yeah, we knew our way around and they didn't. But it's amazing, even people in a lot of the bigger mining companies don't know their way around government. Government is a maze for them and they find it very, very hard.
I would have thought frightening for some.
Yes, for some, yes. I think that's true. They just don't want to go near it. So when they can approach people that do have the experience, do know their way around and do know some of the people involved, then they feel a lot easier. It makes their life livable, yeah.
You mentioned earlier on the goldfields and your close association with that. What are some of the other things you're involved in the goldfields? I understood you undertook some projects, historical projects, and some work with Mark Neville and people like that.
Well, we were immersed in goldfields life, and to some extent I still am. For instance, when I first went to Kalgoorlie Boulder, I couldn't get over the wonderful old buildings that were there, but they were not valued by the people of the area to the extent that they should have. They were not on the State Register of Heritage Places. So one of the things that we were able to do with my wife Leslie was to pay for people who were experts to actually do the work to register those buildings with the National Trust. Then later on, because the Seaway O'Connor pipeline from Mundaring up to Kalgoorlie was so important to our history, Mark Neville and I, my colleague, we were able to garner about $12 million to have a lot of that preserved and kept for contemporary history.
And you remain involved in the goldfields at this time?
Oh yes, we remain in all facets, not all facets, but many facets of life in the goldfields. I
understand you're still a life member of the Landcare project up there?
Yes, we set that up nearly 40 years ago now. It's the biggest environmental group in the goldfields. It's one of the longest standing environmental groups in Western Australia. Yep. It's been highly successful. It brings in people from government, local government, industry, and just people off the street.
Fantastic. On the other side of things, and getting back to the lobbying, which we touched on briefly, there appears to have been a few missteps along the way. Would you like to give us a bit of background to the controversy surrounding your involvement in lobbying?
Well, missteps, I wouldn't like to use that word. A controversy, I would certainly have to embrace that, because we have been, as lobbyists, highly controversial. There were a series of inquiries, people would know about them in Western Australia, the CCC inquiries, under the heading first of the Smith speech inquiry, and then a much more broadly based inquiry, the lobbyist term of reference inquiry. And that process was, in my view, a very, very unfair process. I would like to say to you that in all of my lobbying, I've always tried to act legally, ethically, and importantly, morally. And I think I've done that. It was presented in another way by these inquiries, and I'm writing a book, hopefully, to set the record straight.
We'll talk more about the CCC investigation in our second interview, but for now, perhaps you'd just like to give us a brief thumbnail of what the outcomes were as far as you're concerned, after 7 years of investigation.
There were, I think, a number of findings which were highly deleterious against myself and Brian and other people, public servants, quite innocent people. They were all overturned. There were up to about 40, I think, prosecutions. Every single one of them except one on a minor issue did not result in a conviction being recorded. The judiciary, independent judiciary at the time, commented, if I can just use my own example, for instance, on my demeanour and my standing, and they said that I was a witness of truth and a person that always told the truth. Now, those sorts of comments, unfortunately, get lost in the media, but I was very proud when an independent judge was prepared to say that, or judges, on a couple of occasions.
So to be clear on this, you were found guilty of absolutely nothing?
Nothing, no. Firstly, I do want to expose what happened.
Yep. Because
I don't think people really understand how egregious this activity was. But secondly, there were a lot of very, very innocent people that were badly hurt. They had their reputations confiscated from them, they had their careers taken away, they lost their jobs. Every single one of those people was later on exonerated, but they never got their jobs back. They didn't get their reputations back in total, and they're still suffering.
That'll be the subject for our next interview. Thank you, Julian.
Thank you, John.